Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be completely honest with you right out of the gate here. The stack of notes we are going through today actually kept me up last night.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't mean that in the I couldn't put it down thriller novel sense. I mean it in the staring at the ceiling, questioning how the entire world actually works. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely not a comfortable read. It's one of those topics that once you see it, you really just can't unsee it.
exactly. It forces you to look at things we usually consider to be tragedies. So things like bankruptcy, shipwrecks, market crashes, even biological death.
Hmm.
And it asks you to just flip the lens completely.
Right, to stop looking at them as disasters that we have to avoid at all costs.
Right. And to see them as the actual fuel that keeps the engine of the world running.
It is a ruthless logic. There is absolutely no sugarcoating it.
Ruthless is definitely the word. So for you listening, today we are digging into some deep excerpts from Nassim Nicholas Taleb's work on anti-fragility. Specifically, we're looking at a section with the incredibly heavy title, What Kills Me Makes Others Stronger.
It's a bold title.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is to explore a question that sounds, frankly, almost offensive on the surface.
Oh.
I know. But I want to ask you, the listener, why should we be genuinely thankful when our favorite local business goes bust? Or, to take it to the extreme, why should we be thanking the Titanic for sinking?
God, it sounds so callous when you put it that way. It sounds like we're just totally devoid of empathy.
It feels terrible.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the hook.
It is. But if you can get past that initial emotional rejection.
Right, gut reaction of sad things are bad.
Exactly. If you can push past that, it unlocks a completely new way of seeing systems. It's really about understanding the fundamental tension between the part and the whole.
That's the core of it, right? The part versus the whole. Because as humans, we are the part. I am me, you are you. We inherently identify with the individual unit.
Naturally.
But this text argues that for the whole, so the economy, the species, nature itself, for that to survive and improve, the part often has to be sacrificed.
Precisely. And not just sacrificed in some, ritualistic or symbolic way, but mechanically sacrificed. We're talking about how systems actually process information. The destruction of the unit is actually a data transfer.
Okay, data transfer makes it sound very abstract, very sterile. So let's ground this immediately.
Good idea.
Let's start with something fairly low stakes before we get to the life and death stuff. Let's talk about lunch.
The restaurant paradox. This is honestly the best entry point into the whole theory.
The text opens with this example, and I think it's brilliant. I want you to picture the restaurant scene in your city. Just pick the wildest, most competitive, food-obsessed neighborhood you know.
Somewhere where the rent is ridiculously high and the customers are incredibly picky.
Exactly. I'm picturing it right now. You've got new places opening every single month, crazy fusion concepts, trendy decor, but also
Release signs.
Yep, old places closing down. It's just chaotic.
It is incredibly chaotic. And if you look at it from the perspective of the people involved, so the owners, the head chefs, the waitstaff, it is a nightmare of fragility. The failure rate in the restaurant industry is notoriously high. I think the statistic is something like 60% fail in the first year alone.
It's a total meat grinder.
It really is. The margins are razor thin. One bad health inspection, one rise in commercial rent, one shift in trends where people suddenly stop eating kale and start eating, crickets, and you are out of business.
Right. If I open Host's House of Ribs tomorrow, the statistical probability is that I will be bankrupt within 3 years. As an individual unit, I am incredibly fragile. I am constantly at risk of financial death.
You are, and here is the shift that really matters, because you are fragile. The restaurant industry as a whole is rock solid. And in fact, it's better than rock solid. It's anti-fragile.
Okay, walk me through that connection. How does my personal misery make the system better?
Well, think about the quality of food in that competitive city we just imagined. Why is the food so good? Why is the service snappy? Why are the prices competitive?
Well, because if the food is bad, nobody goes there. They just go next door.
Precisely. The system is utterly ruthless at weeding out incompetence. It weeds out bad recipes, lazy service, dirty kitchens, bad pricing models. But the mechanism, how does it actually weed them out?
By killing the business.
By killing the individual unit. When Host's House of Ribs fails, it sends a massive signal to the market. Your bankruptcy is a data point. It says, okay, people in this neighborhood do not want ribs at that price point, or they don't like that specific barbecue sauce.
So my failure is actually just information.
It is high-fidelity information. The
Yeah.
next guy who opens a spot in that exact location, let's say he opens a vegan taco joint, he has that information. He knows what didn't work, so he doesn't make your mistake. He makes a new, different mistake.
And maybe he fails too.
Maybe. And then a third guy comes in, learns from both of you, and opens a place that becomes an absolute staple. The aggregate quality of the whole system, the food scene, stays high, or goes up specifically because the weak units are allowed to die.
It's like a filtration system. The constant churning of failures effectively filters the system for quality.
Exactly. Now, to really see why this matters, you have to look at the alternative. And the source material brings up the Soviet cafeteria scenario.
Yes. This is a really helpful visualization. It creates such a stark contrast.
It really does. Imagine a world where we decided that restaurant failure was just too cruel. We have too much empathy. We don't want anyone to go bankrupt, lose their house, suffer the shame of failure. So the government passes a law. Every single restaurant is guaranteed to stay open forever.
So robust restaurants,
Yeah,
immortal restaurants.
right. We bail them out. If they lose money, we top them up. If nobody comes in to eat, we subsidize them.
So I can serve burnt toast, charge $50 for it, treat my customers like dirt, and I stay in business.
You stay in business forever. You have zero incentive to improve. You have zero fear. What happens to the food scene in that city?
It becomes gray sludge. It becomes the stereotypical Soviet cafeteria.
Total stagnation. Low quality.
Right.
Systemic shortages. I mean, why clean the kitchen if you can't be shut down? Why invent a new dish if you get paid exactly the same anyway? Because you have removed the stressor, the possibility of death. You have completely removed the quality.
Wow. So by making the individual robust and safe, you have made the system fragile and terrible.
That is the paradox. The reliability of the restaurant industry depends entirely on the fragility of the individual restaurant.
That is such a wild trade-off when you really sit with it. We get great food, we get innovation, exciting new flavors, literally because entrepreneurs are ruining their lives and going broke.
In a way, yeah. The text quotes this directly, saying, "The sacrifices of some units are necessary for the well-being of the whole."
It's almost like an economic ritual sacrifice. We just don't call it that. We just call it Chapter 11.
It is, and this brings us to the concept of layers and hierarchies. You can't just look at a system and say, oh, is this anti-fragile? You have to ask, anti-fragile for whom? Anti-fragility for the economy often means extreme fragility for the entrepreneur.
And the source material points out that this isn't just an economic theory. It's not just about money. This is baked into the fundamental laws of the universe.
Right. The text moves from the kitchen to the cosmos pretty quickly here. It introduces the concept of fractal self-similarity.
Okay, that sounds like a very heavy math term. Let's unpack that for the listener who maybe hasn't brushed up on their advanced geometry lately.
Sure. So it references the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot. A fractal is basically a structure where the small parts look exactly like the big parts. Think of a coastline. If you look at it from a satellite, it's jagged. If you zoom in on just a mile of it, it's jagged. If you zoom in on a single rock, it's jagged. The pattern repeats at every single scale.
So the idea here is that this sacrifice, the sacrifice of the part for the whole, happens at every single layer of existence.
Exactly. It's a universal law.
So it's not just businesses, it's happening inside me.
It is happening inside you right now, literally as we speak. The text describes the hierarchy inside a biological organism. So let's zoom all the way in. Think about your cells.
Okay, I'm zoomed in.
Inside your cells, you have proteins. These proteins are the workers. They are folding, unfolding, doing their jobs, but sometimes they get damaged. They misfold. They become useless, or they even become toxic.
So what does the cell do? Does it fix them?
No. The cell has a mechanism called autophagy. It literally comes from the Greek for self-eating. The cell identifies the weak or broken proteins, captures them, completely break them down, and recycles them into raw materials to build new proteins.
So the protein dies so the cell can live.
Correct. If the cell had some kind of no protein left behind policy, if it protected the bad proteins, the cell would just clog up with garbage and die.
Okay, so that's the micro layer. Move up a layer.
Now look at the cells themselves. Your body is made of trillions of them, and they are constantly dying. There's a specific process called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death.
Programmed cell death. So it's completely intentional.
It is essential. If a cell's DNA gets corrupted, maybe by UV light from the sun or just a random mutation, that cell is designed to essentially commit suicide. It detects the error and shuts itself down for the good of the organism.
It sacrifices itself so I don't get sick.
Exactly. And what happens when a cell refuses to die? What happens when a cell decides it wants to be robust and immortal?
Oh, that's cancer, isn't it?
That is exactly what cancer is. A tumor is just a group of cells that refuse to sacrifice themselves for the whole. They prioritize their own survival over the organism's survival, and in doing so, they kill the organism.
That is a chilling way to think about cancer. It's a rebellion against the fundamental logic of the system.
It is. It's a catastrophic failure of the anti-fragile process.
And then, if we zoom out again, we've gone from protein to cell, now from cell to organism.
The organism meaning you eventually dies.
Well, thanks for the reminder.
Sorry. But it's the exact same logic. Why do we die? Why haven't we evolved to just live forever? Because for the species to evolve, the individual has to step aside. If the older generation never died, the gene pool would just stagnate. We wouldn't adapt to new environments.
So it's just layers of death all the way down.
That's one way to look at it. But the more optimistic view, the systems view, is that it is layers of improvement all the way up. We only see the top layer from the outside. You know, the healthy body, the thriving economy, the lush forest. But underneath that calm surface, there is a constant churning war of competition and destruction that actually maintains that stability.
It's like looking at a duck gliding on a pond. Above the water, it's completely smooth. Below the water, the feet are paddling like crazy. Except in this case, the feet are dying.
In a manner of speaking, yes. The stability of the top layer is purchased with the volatility of the bottom layer.
Which brings up a really famous phrase that source material spends a lot of time dissecting. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
Ah, yes. Good old Nietzsche.
We hear this all the time. It's on gym walls, it's in pop songs, it's the caption on every Instagram post after a breakup. But the expert in our source material says we need to be very, very careful with this idea.
Right. Tellett basically argues that this quote is actually quite misleading because it confuses two completely different mechanisms. It confuses hormesis with evolution.
I definitely conflated these two things before reading this deep dive material. I thought they were basically the same thing.
Most people do. But distinguishing them is absolutely critical to understanding how the world actually works.
Okay, so let's define them. What is hormesis?
Hormesis, which is sometimes called phenotypic plasticity, is what happens to the individual unit. It's when you take a small hit, a small stressor, and you actually get physically stronger in response.
Like getting calluses on your hands.
Exactly. Or weightlifting. You go to the gym, you lift a heavy weight, you are actually causing micro tears in your muscle fibers. You are literally damaging yourself. But your body responds to that stress signal by over-repairing the muscle and adding more fiber.
So I, the individual, survive the stress and I become better.
Right. Or think of the classic historical example of King Mithridates. He was terrified of being poisoned, so he took tiny, non-lethal doses of poison every single day. His body built up an immunity. That is hormesis.
Okay, so that's what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's the naive view.
Right. That is the individual adapting. But the source argues that there is a much more powerful force at play in nature, which is evolution. And evolution is practically the opposite of hormesis.
How so?
In evolution, the unit does not get stronger in response to stress. The unit simply dies.
Oh.
The benefit isn't for the unit at all. The benefit is transferred to the others who happen to survive.
So it's not what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's what kills me makes you stronger.
Precisely. Or what kills me makes the population stronger.
Can you give us a concrete example of how this looks in practice?
Sure. Think about antibiotic resistance. This is a massive problem in medicine right now. You have a colony of bacteria. You spray them with antibiotics. 99.9% of those bacteria die instantly. They don't get stronger. They don't go to the gym and lift weights and fight back. They're just dead.
Right, they're wiped out.
But maybe 0.1% of them had a totally random genetic mutation, just a freak accident of nature, that happened to make them immune to that specific poison. So they survive.
And because the other 99.9% are dead, the survivors suddenly have all the food and all the space to themselves.
They reproduce like crazy. And suddenly, the entire population is made of these super bacteria. The population became stronger, but not because any individual improved. It got stronger purely because the weak were filtered out.
That distinction is huge. One is self-improvement hormesis, and the other is selection evolution.
And the source material emphasizes that nature vastly prefers selection. Nature is incredibly opportunistic. It loves stressors, it loves randomness, and it loves volatility because those are the primary tools it uses to filter the gene pool.
This directly connects to the selfish gene concept mentioned in the text, right? By Robert Travers.
Yes. The underlying idea is that the physical body, you, me, the wolf, the oak tree, is just a carrier. We are fragile. We are entirely disposable. The part that is actually anti-fragile is the genetic code. The code survives the death of the carrier and moves on, hopefully improved by the test that the previous carrier just failed.
It's fascinating, but also kind of chilling. The text says something like, nature is opportunistic, ruthless, and selfish. It doesn't care about the individual at all once they've reproduced.
It really doesn't. Once you pass on the code, you are largely redundant to nature's primary algorithm. Unless, as the text notes, you are a grandmother-like in elephants or humans helping to raise the next generation. But generally speaking, nature wants turnover. It wants fresh iterations.
Which leads to this incredible thought experiment in the text. I loved this part. The author asks, why can't we just build something that lives forever? Like, why hasn't nature evolved an immortal organism?
It's a fantastic question. Why do we have to die at all? Why not just have one superorganism that keeps repairing itself indefinitely? A biological tank that never, ever breaks down.
Right. Wouldn't that be the ultimate biological success? Wouldn't that be the most efficient way to exist?
You would think so, but the source explains that this creates what is called a forecasting problem.
A forecasting problem. How does living forever create a problem with forecasting?
Well, think about it. If you are an immortal organism and you fully intend to stay alive forever, you have to be able to survive everything.
Everything.
Every possible future event. You need to be perfectly prepared for heat waves, ice ages, meteor strikes, new strains of bacteria, new predators, massive floods, thousand-year droughts, huge changes in the atmosphere.
You essentially have to be a biological Swiss Army knife for the entire future of the universe.
Exactly. And to do that, you would need to perfectly predict what is coming so you can build the defenses for it ahead of time. The text calls this pre-adaptation. But we know for a fact that nature is random. Random events, what Taleb famously calls black swans, are, by definition, totally unpredictable.
So if you are one big immortal thing and you encounter even one thing you didn't predict,
you're toast. Game over. Complete extinction. But you put absolutely all your eggs in one basket.
so what is nature's solution then? If can't predict the future, what does it do instead?
Don't predict. Variate.
Variate.
Instead of building one immortal perfect being, nature produces millions of slightly different, highly fragile beings. It doesn't know what the future holds. Is it going to be cold, hot, wet, dry? Nature doesn't care to guess. It just produces some offspring that like the cold, some that like the heat, some with really thick fur, some with thin fur.
It's hedging its bets. It's literally buying lottery tickets for every possible environmental outcome.
It is the ultimate hedge. When the random event happens, say, a sudden global ice age, nature doesn't need to have predicted it. It just looks at the population and says, oh, look, the thick-furred one survived. Great, we'll just run with that.
So death is actually a feature, not a bug. The death of the wrong variations is literally how the system processes information about the environment.
That is the perfect way to put it. Death is information processing. The source says nature doesn't need to outsmart the future. It changes itself at every step.
This brings us to a really crucial transition in our deep dive. We've talked about biology, we've talked about how nature uses death to learn. Now we need to talk about how humans handle this. Because unlike nature, we humans absolutely hate failure. We hate accidents. We try to prevent them at all costs.
And that is exactly where we get into the difference between a good system and a bad system in human design. The text uses a really powerful comparison here: aviation versus finance.
This was a total light bulb moment for me, because we tend to think of all man-made systems as being basically similar, but Taleb argues they can work in opposite ways. Let's talk about aviation first. The source mentions the Titanic, and specifically Henry Petrosky, who is a historian of engineering.
Yes. Petrosky's argument is that the sinking of the Titanic was a horrific tragedy, obviously. 1,500 people died. But from a purely information perspective, it was a massive donation of knowledge to the system.
Because before the Titanic, shipbuilders were incredibly arrogant. They thought they had conquered the ocean. They called it unsinkable.
Right. Complete hubris. But the sinking forced them to face reality. It revealed fatal, undeniable flaws in bulkhead design, in the quality of the hull steel, and most famously, in lifeboat regulations.
So they changed the rules.
They changed everything. They retrofitted existing ships. They completely rewrote international maritime law. The argument is that the people who unfortunately died on the Titanic effectively saved the lives of everyone who sailed on a ship afterwards.
The sacrifices of some were necessary for the safety of the whole.
Exactly. And this is exactly how the modern aviation industry works today. The source calls aviation a good system because it is fundamentally designed to learn from its mistakes.
The text mentions a few specific flights. Swiss Flight 111, TWA 800.
Right. When a commercial plane crashes, it is a horrible, heartbreaking event. But what happens immediately after?
Investigators, the NTSB, they immediately go find the black box.
They descend on the wreckage. They don't just say, oops, bad luck. They find the specific microscopic cause. Was it a tiny hairline crack in a fan blade? Was it a faulty sensor wire? Was it a specific pilot training error? And then, and this is the key part, they update the safety protocols for every other plane in the world.
So if a part fails on a plane in Tokyo, a plane in New York gets that exact part replaced before it can fail.
Yes. The error is what they call non-systemic. One plane crashing doesn't physically knock other planes out of the sky, but the learning the information is systemic.
So there is a negative correlation to error. A crash today makes a crash tomorrow less likely.
That is the gold standard of human systems. We want systems where failure leads directly to safety. Now let's look at the bad system, finance.
The modern financial system. The text argues it is set up in almost the exact opposite way.
It is. Just think about how banks work. In aviation, planes are independent physical units. But in finance, the banks are deeply, deeply interconnected.
Interconnected how?
Through debt, through complex contracts.
Yeah.
Bank A owes money to Bank B, which owes money to Bank C. They are constantly trading with each other.
So if Bank A crashes,
Bank B suddenly has a massive hole in its balance sheet. It panics. It immediately stops lending to Bank C, and then Bank C crashes.
Litigation.
Exactly. It's like a row of dominoes. Or imagine a mountain climber who is roped to 10 other climbers. If one guy falls, he pulls everybody else down the mountain with him. The failure of one unit makes the failure of all the other units more likely.
So that is a positive correlation to error.
Yes. And the source argues that this is because we have intentionally removed the natural barriers. In our constant quest for efficiency and globalization, we've connected absolutely everything. We wanted a perfectly frictionless global economy.
But friction is what stops a fire from spreading.
Exactly. We removed all the firewalls in the economy. So when a virus or, a bad mortgage bond like we saw in 2008 enters the system, it just sweeps through the whole thing unimpeded.
The goal then, according to the text, is that we need to build socioeconomic systems that look way more like airlines. Small, independent errors that provide localized information rather than massive, systemic, world-ending collapses.
We want Titanic mistakes, which are tragic but instructive and local, not global financial crisis mistakes, where the entire world just grinds to a halt.
Which leads us naturally to the people who are actually taking these risks, the people who are effectively piloting the planes of the economy, the entrepreneurs.
The unsung heroes of the story, according to Taleb.
This section of the text actually got surprisingly emotional for me. I didn't expect to sit here and feel bad for business owners, but the author talks about being an ingrate.
It's a very poignant image he paints. The host is sitting in a nice restaurant, eating a delicious meal, maybe a perfectly seared tuna steak. He's sipping nice wine, and he suddenly realizes that he is benefiting immensely from the system. But somewhere out there is a failed entrepreneur, the guy who tried to open a restaurant across the street and went completely bankrupt, who is probably sitting at home eating canned tuna because he's broke.
And the successful restaurant is only good because that other guy failed and proved what didn't work.
Right. The failed entrepreneur provided crucial information to the market. He essentially signaled, this specific location is bad, or this price point doesn't work, or people around here don't want this cuisine. That is incredibly valuable data. But he paid for that data with his own livelihood.
He literally subsidized my nice lunch with his bankruptcy.
Essentially, yes.
And we don't thank him. We look down on him.
We do. We heavily stigmatize failure in business. If you go bankrupt, people think you're incompetent or reckless. We distance ourselves from them.
But the Force proposes something fairly radical here to change that. A National Entrepreneur Day.
It's a fantastic proposal. The underlying idea is to honor failed entrepreneurs in the exact same way we honor dead soldiers.
That's a really bold comparison, soldiers. I feel like some people might push back pretty hard on that.
It definitely sounds extreme at first, but think about the logic behind it. Why do we honor soldiers? Because they assume a massive risk. The risk of death for the collective safety or the freedom of the group. They sacrifice the part for the whole.
And the entrepreneur.
The entrepreneur assumes a huge risk, financial ruin, loss of social reputation, extreme stress for the collective knowledge and growth of the economy. Without their personal risk, we are stuck with the Soviet cafeteria.
Wow. There's no such thing as a failed soldier. Likewise, there's no such thing as a failed entrepreneur.
Unless they were completely cowardly or fraudulent, of course. The text is careful to make that distinction. But if they took a legitimate risk and the market simply said no, they have performed a vital public service. They have fed the process of evolution.
It really reframes how you look at a going out of business sign in a storefront. It's not a tombstone, it's a receipt for information that was just donated to the economy.
It is. But there is a major caveat here. We have to be really careful. The source strongly distinguishes between heroic risk-taking and arrogant risk-taking.
Right. The text takes a pretty big swipe at bureaucrats and bankers in this section.
Specifically, people who take risks where they get all the upside, but others get all the downside. This is fundamentally what is called the agency problem.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about the banking crisis. If a banker takes a huge, reckless risk with the bank's money and it happens to pay off, he gets a multi-million-dollar bonus.
He buys a yacht.
Exactly. But if he takes that exact same risk and it blows up the bank, who pays the bill?
The taxpayer. The government bails him out.
Exactly. He keeps the bonus from the good years, and the public pays for his mistakes in the bad years. That is not heroic. That is parasitic.
Yeah.
That is essentially transferring all your fragility to everybody else.
Which leads right into the massive problem of bailouts. We talked about the Soviet cafeteria earlier, but let's get specific here. Why are bailouts so uniquely bad, according to this anti-fragile logic?
Because bailouts completely stop the evolutionary process.
They stop the pain.
They stop the pain, yes, but they also stop the learning. When the government swoops in and saves a big company that realistically should have failed, they are effectively saying, we are not going to let the information in the system update. They are artificially protecting the unfit.
It's like stopping the autophagy inside the cell. You're forcing the cell to keep the bad proteins.
Exactly. And if you keep enough bad proteins around, eventually the entire cell dies. If you keep enough zombie companies alive, companies that can't actually make a profit but are kept on life support by cheap loans and government bailouts, eventually the whole economy stagnates and collapses.
So by trying to artificially avoid a recession, by trying to put out every small forest fire, you basically guarantee a massive depression later.
That is the core argument. You let all the dead wood build up on the forest floor because you are terrified of a small fire. But eventually, a lightning strike hits, and the accumulated fuel creates a catastrophic firestorm that burns everything down, including the healthy trees.
You are transferring fragility from the individual company straight to the whole system.
Precisely.
The text mentions business schools in this context, too. It points out a conflict of interest that I found really, really interesting.
Yes. This is a subtle but incredibly important point. If you go to business school, what do they teach you?
Management, accounting, risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Basically, how to keep your specific company alive.
Right. They teach you how to make your individual company robust. They teach you to survive at all costs. But the economy as a whole doesn't want every company to survive.
The economy wants turnover.
The economy desperately wants people to take crazy risks. It wants wild variation. It wants 1,000 people to try 1,000 stupid, risky ideas because one of them might turn out to be the iPhone or the steam engine.
So there is a built-in conflict. My goal as a CEO is safety and survival. The economy's goal for me is risk and possible death.
And natural systems actually solve this by encouraging human overconfidence. Nature actually wants us to think we can beat the odds. Think about it. If everyone was perfectly rational and accurately calculated the failure rate of restaurants, nobody would ever open a restaurant.
And we'd all be eating at the Soviet cafeteria.
Exactly. We absolutely need the delusion of the entrepreneur to drive the machine forward.
That's actually kind of beautiful and deeply tragic at the exact same time. We are hardwired to be irrationally optimistic, just so the species as a whole can progress.
It is the human condition in a complex system.
I want to pivot now to the final segment of our notes, which deals with illusions. We touched on Nietzsche earlier, but I want to go back to that "what doesn't kill me makes me stronger" quote.
Yes. The text essentially debunks it, or at least heavily reinterprets it through the lens of survivorship bias.
The expert in the text brings up the Gulag example here.
Yeah.
This was really striking to read.
It's a classic case study for this concept. You look at survivors of the Soviet gulags, the brutal prison camps, the people who made it out after 10 or 15 years, they seem incredibly tough, hardened, unbelievably resilient.
Right, and you might naturally think, wow, the Gulag made them strong.
Right, suffering builds character. But the text says, no.
The Gulag didn't make them stronger.
The Gulag systematically killed the weak. The people who came out were simply the ones who were already strong when they went in. They had the innate physical or mental constitution to survive it. The experience didn't create their strength. It merely revealed it by aggressively filtering out everyone else.
It's a filter, not a training camp.
Exactly. And mistaking a filter for a training camp is a huge, dangerous logical error. It creates this pervasive illusion that trauma is inherently good for you, when in reality, trauma is just lethal to those who aren't pre-adapted to handle it.
So again, it's a transfer of fragility. The fragility was transferred to the people who died, leaving the strong survivors around to tell the story.
Correct. And because the dead don't write memoirs, we only ever hear from the strong, so we assume the experience itself made them strong.
Wow. Now, this leads directly to the final metaphor of the deep dive, and possibly my absolute favorite image from this whole stack of notes, the Procrustean bed.
Ah, Greek mythology. This is Taleb's absolute favorite metaphor for modernity.
Tell us the story of Procrustes.
So Procrustes was a figure in Greek myth. He was an innkeeper on the main road to Athens, a very hospitable guy, ostensibly. He would invite weary travelers in for a warm meal and a night's rest, and he had a very special bed for them.
But there was a catch.
A huge catch. Procrustes had an absolute obsession with fit. He demanded that the traveler fit the bed perfectly.
And if they didn't fit?
If the traveler was too short for the bed, Procrustes would put them on a medieval rack and stretch their limbs until they snapped and stretched into the exact right length.
Yikes. And if they were too tall?
He would simply take an axe and chop off their legs until they fit the dimensions of the bed.
It's so gruesome. But the text argues this is the perfect metaphor for what we are doing to the world right now.
It really is. Think about our economic models. Think about our corporate careers. We have these rigid models of how the world should work. We have our neat spreadsheets, our 5-year plans, our constant desire for smooth, linear growth. That is the bed.
And reality is the traveler.
Exactly. Life is messy. Life is highly volatile. It has crazy ups and downs. It's always too tall or too short for our models.
So instead of changing the bed, instead of building systems that can actually handle the messiness of reality,
we chop off the legs of reality. We try to violently force life to fit our smooth models. We completely suppress volatility. We try to medicate every normal mood swing. We automatically bail out every failing company. We manipulate interest rates to try and forcefully prevent the natural business cycle from happening. We basically try to make the graph look like a perfectly straight line.
And the text argues that this is deeply harmful.
It's incredibly harmful. By removing the limbs of volatility, we're actually crippling the entire system.
The source uses the image of Baudelaire's albatross here to illustrate this, right?
Yes, the famous poem, The Albatross. The albatross is a magnificent, awe-inspiring bird when it flies. It has these massive, powerful wings. It is literally built for the wind, for the severe storm. It thrives in the chaos and volatility of the ocean air.
But when you land it,
When you capture it and put it on the wooden deck of a ship on the flat, stable, supposedly safe ground, it looks ridiculous and clumsy. Its giant wings just get in the way. It trips over itself. The sailors mock it.
what is made to fly will not do well trapped on the ground.
Anti-fragile systems like the complex economy, like biological evolution, like even our own immune systems, they need air. They need volatility. They need stress to function. If you trap them in a Procrustean bed of perfect artificial stability, they wither. They become the clumsy albatross.
So by trying to make everything perfectly safe and predictable, we are actually fighting against our own nature. We're actively making ourselves weaker.
We are creating a massive hidden risk. We make things look calm and controlled on the surface, but underneath, the fragility is quietly building up because we aren't allowing those necessary small fires to burn. And eventually, boom, the big crash happens.
This brings us to the outro, and really the core emotional conflict of this entire deep dive. The text calls it the humanist dilemma.
The author of the source material openly admits this is painful to write about. He proudly calls himself a humanist.
He says he fundamentally hates the ruthlessness of nature. And I think, honestly, we all do.
We should. As humans, we have empathy. We care deeply about the individual. We do not want the restaurant owner to starve. We don't want the weak members of society to be culled. We don't want to live in some harsh Spartan society where if you break a leg, you're just left behind for the wolves.
Right. The Enlightenment was all about protecting the individual rights, individual happiness, protection. But evolution is all about the collective.
That is the ultimate tension here. We desperately want to protect the part, which is humanism, but nature demands we sacrifice the part for the whole, which is anti-fragility.
So how do we actually resolve this?
Mhm.
Is there a balance we can strike? Or do we just have to coldly choose between being safe and stagnant or ruthless and successful?
The source suggests there is a middle path. The goal should be to fiercely shield people from total ruin, give them dignity, give them a strong safety net, absolutely don't let them starve, but do not shield the system from the information that comes from failure.
So let the company fail, but help the actual guy get back on his feet.
Exactly. Protect the entrepreneur, not the enterprise. Let the business die naturally so the economy can learn from it, but honor the risk taker so they can survive and try again. Don't stigmatize the failure. Treat it more like a battle scar.
That seems like a really crucial distinction for policymakers and honestly for us as individuals. It's about separating your personal ego from your project. You're not your business. Your business is just an experiment. If the experiment fails, you're still the scientist. You just have more data now.
That is by far the healthiest way to view it. It is really the only way to maintain a dynamic, evolving world that doesn't completely lose its soul in the process.
Man, this has been a heavy one, but an incredibly important one. We've covered everything from local soup kitchens to cellular biology to ancient Greek myths. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to really mull over. We've talked about failure as information. We've talked about the ingrate diner benefiting from bankruptcies.
What's the final provocation for them?
Next time you see a business close down in your neighborhood, or a major project at work fail, or even when you make a painful mistake yourself, can you stop seeing it as a waste? Can you flip that switch in your brain and see it instead as a generous donation of vital information to the rest of us? And the harder question, are you brave enough to be the one who actually provides that information?
That is definitely the question of the day.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Stay anti-fragile.